What is going on? Welcome to episode 19 of the Fight Science Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Coach Adam Snyder. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I'm a performance and recovery coach, and I'm an active MMA fighter. I missed you last week. I made a commitment last year to post a podcast every single week, and I fell short of that commitment last week. This is not an excuse. It's been a bit of a hectic couple of weeks, and it's going to be a couple more hectic weeks. Alexandra, my partner, and I are moving to Thailand at the end of the month, February 27th, for 3 months. We're going to be there till around June, which I'm fucking stoked about. We're heading to Phuket. The plan is to be in the Bang Tao area. I'm going to train at Bang Tao and just live the lifestyle, man. It's something that I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. Alexandra's always wanted to do that since she was a kid. We're both fairly spiritual. She's a marine biologist, so there's incredible opportunities out there with corals and diving, and it's just time before we start to settle down and have kids. We want to really go and experience the culture. So needless to say, preparing to that has been a little hectic, which is why I missed last week. I'm not going to allow that to again, so you're going to get a special double presentation of the Fight Science Made Simple podcast this week. I'm going to be going live and recording on Sunday, actually, with Alexandra, and we're going to be talking about our prep for Thailand, why we're going to Thailand a little bit more, what our entire process is going to be like once we get out there, and I'm really going to be documenting the whole Thailand experience even more on our Instagram. So get excited about it and make sure you tune in on Sunday for a special double episode to make up for the episode that I missed last week. If you're new to the podcast, though, welcome. I typically record these episodes every single week, and the whole purpose of the podcast, like the name of the podcast suggests, is to make fight science simple. MMA is a little over 30 years old, and it's still super far behind other sports in terms of the science-backed, data-driven care that athletes get when it comes to their strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, and mindset. And so what I want to do is pull back the curtain on how fighters actually should train to have longevity and success in their careers, recover at a very high level, but take these confusing topics, because I know there's so much misinformation out there, and make it very simple and digestible so you can walk away with something actionable and actually see changes in your game today instead of watching a fucking YouTube video, doom scrolling on some content, and then being confused as fuck. I want this to be the most valuable podcast for fighters on the planet. So if you're digging the content and you've been watching for a while, thank you. If you haven't followed the podcast already, what are you doing? We're dropping heat over here. It's going to take your game to the next level. And the number one thing that you can do to help the podcast, if you are digging what we're dropping, is just share it. Share with a teammate, friend, training partner, someone that you know can benefit from this. The more ears that we can get this in, the bigger impact we're going to be able to have on the fight world is what I'm here for, bro. And girls. I know we got a lot of girls. I got some girls on the team. My audience is mostly dudes, but we got a lot of chicks that are checking it out as well. Today, I got a special episode for you. We're talking about all things power, how to develop power, what causes power, why power is important. Now than ever, more than ever, it's never been more important to have crazy finishing power. I mean, look at the Contender Series. That is one of the most streamlined ways to get onto the UFC, and it's all about finishing fights. Dana started giving out $25,000 bonuses for finishes at the beginning of this year with the Paramount deal. People want to see finishes. People don't want to see long decision wins. It's not enough just to win anymore. You got to finish fights, and you got to finish them in a devastating manner. I got guys on my team that are professionals with impressive records. They got 6 wins. They got 5 wins. They got maybe 1 or 2 losses, but they don't have enough finishes. And the UFC is like, bro, we got to see more finishes, and then we'll give you a chance. There are other guys that I know that only have a couple fights, 2, 3, 4 fights, but they're 4-0 with 4 finishes, and they get Contender Series shots right away. So being able to finish fights is super important. It's also a very big misconception that power and your ability to finish fights with power is purely genetic. Now, don't get me wrong. There are components to power that are pretty genetically determined, and we're going to talk about that. But if you're someone that struggles with power, you got pillow soft punches, or maybe power just isn't in your genetics, it doesn't mean that you still can't fucking finish fights. You can generate power. I know because I used to be that person. I'm not naturally athletic at all. And it's kind of interesting, like growing up when I was sparring as a teenager, I was taking my first kickboxing fights when I was in college. I always, in the back of my mind, never identified myself as someone that had power. I just thought it was something I naturally lacked. But then through studying exercise science, getting a degree in exercise science, becoming a certified strength and conditioning specialist, working with some of the best athletes in the world, I realized, oh fuck, you can generate power. And then I learned how to generate power, and I finished my first two fights. My first two MMA fights in the first round. My third MMA fight was a war. That guy just had a chin. And in my fourth MMA fight, I dropped the guy pretty early, and cut him pretty bad. So you can generate power, and I'm living proof of it. And I'm going to teach you how to do it today. I'm going to fucking drop some heat on you guys. So get a pen and paper, get ready, because this episode is about to be fire. Okay, so it's very important. We have to understand first what causes power. And then once you understand what causes power, then you can start training it. So we're going to talk about what is power, what causes it, how to train for punching power, for finishing power, and then when the best time to work and train your finishing power is. Okay? So first and foremost, in terms of power, let's talk about the physics behind it. Power is simply the product of force times velocity. Force is what it sounds like, how much force you can generate, and velocity is how quickly you can get from point A to point B. Power is when you bridge the gap between the two. With force, it's all about being very, very strong, producing as much force as possible, but I'm not too concerned about speed. So we all know those people that are strong as shit. They can squat and deadlift and bench a lot, but they're fucking slow, and so they have no power. On the other side of the things, velocity is how quickly you can move. We know all those people that are really, really fast, but they're fucking weak, and so they have no power. And so what differentiates power from force production and strength, or power from speed and velocity, is what we call rate of force development. How quickly you can get from point A to B, and how much force you can produce as quickly and violently and aggressively as possible, okay? We're going to dive back into that little physics equation and learn a little bit more about how to specifically train your force and velocity in a little bit. But before we go to that, I want to talk about the energy system that's responsible for giving you devastating finishing power. If you've listened to this podcast or you've been following me on Instagram for any amount of time, I talk a lot about energy systems. Your body uses 3 energy systems to produce energy. Everything that you do requires energy, and that energy comes from one of your body's 3 energy systems. The aerobic system, which is really long duration bouts of activity like running a marathon, okay? Your anaerobic lactic system, which is like up to 90 seconds of really, really intense exercise. Think about like a wrestling scramble. And then you have your alactic system, or your ATP phosphocreatine system. This is your fastest energy system, lasting up to 10 seconds. It fatigues and burns out very quickly, but it also is very, very powerful for how quickly it produces energy. This ATP phosphocreatine system, ATP PCR system, we're going to call it the alactic system for short, is the energy system that is responsible for causing finishing power, okay? If you are struggling with power, it means that you either need more force, you either need more velocity, you need to increase your rate of force development, or you need to specifically target your alactic power in a specific way, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other caveat is technique. Your technique might suck. So you might have a lot of natural power, but you're technically awful and you don't execute your strikes efficiently, and that leaks power. But I'm not a skills coach. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking specifically about the athletic quality of power. So let's understand how the alactic system works, okay? I want you to think about currency, okay? The currency that your body uses for energy, your body's energy source, is called ADP, adenosine triphosphate. I said ADP, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So you have this head, it's an adenosine head, and you have 3 phosphate tails on it. And these phosphates, they're bonded together and they're bonded to this adenosine head, and there's a lot of fucking energy built up. I want you to think about like when you were a kid and you were in school and you had 3 kids on the school bus sitting in the same seat and they were all crammed up. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of energy. And when your school bus driver sits back and yells at you, hey, break it up, 2 in a seat, and one kid releases, what happens? The other 2, they spread out. All of that energy releases. And that's what happens with the alactic system. You have ATP that's already available in your muscle. And when you do something like throw a knockout punch, this has to happen really rapidly and really quick and really explosively. And so your body needs immediate energy. So what it does is it breaks apart one of those ATPs. It basically removes one of the kids out of the bus seat. It releases energy, boom. And that's what causes a finishing strike, okay? That's what causes devastating power. The thing is, you only have so much ATP available, and then after you throw a couple punches for 10 seconds or some knockout strikes or some powerful kicks, you're out of ATP, and then you fatigue and you're not able to be powerful anymore. That energy is not available. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes for that ATP to repair. Basically what happens is you have something called creatine available in your blood, and that creatine is a phosphate, and it basically reattaches to ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The ATP breaks apart, it becomes ADP, and then creatine phosphate binds to it and it becomes ATP again. But it takes a while. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes for that ADP to be regenerated into ATP. This is why, it's very, very rapid how quickly you can be explosive and powerful, but you can't be powerful for long, okay? Quick little bioenergetics lesson for you on how you get energy for power, okay? Now, when it comes to actually improving power, you have your alactic power, how much force and power and velocity your fast twitch muscle fibers can actually produce, right? How quickly you can produce that power. And then you also have alactic capacity, how long you can sustain your power for. Now, alactic power is much more trainable than alactic capacity. Alactic capacity, when people say power is genetic, they're thinking about alactic capacity because alactic capacity, how long you can sustain power for, is determined by the total amount of fast twitch muscle fibers that you have. And that's genetic. You're born with the fast twitch muscle fibers that you're born with. You don't really grow more fast twitch muscle fibers. And so your alactic capacity, how long you can sustain your alactic system, alactic power for, is pretty genetic. It's pretty fixed. Now, if you've never trained for alactic capacity before, then there is some room for improvement, and you can do this with something like alactic capacity intervals, where maybe you're doing like a 10-second sprint and then you're resting for an incomplete rest time, maybe 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. You're not allowing your ATP system, your ATP PCR system, to fully regenerate, and so you're just training your body's ability to repeat explosivity. Once you've trained a couple phases of that, you're going to cap out how much alactic capacity you can actually develop. And so it's probably not the best use of time to develop alactic capacity if you've already trained that. And you want to spend more time focusing on improving your alactic power, how much power your fast twitch muscle fibers can produce and how quickly they can produce that power. Okay? Now, sciencey, complicated stuff out of the way, we're going to go back to talking about our force velocity curve, how to actually train power, because you're going to improve your alactic system and your alactic system ability to improve power by training what we talked about a little bit earlier, your force and velocity. Power sits on a curve that we call the force velocity curve. So you have an x-axis, you have a y-axis. At the very top of the force velocity curve, you have force. The very bottom of the force velocity curve, you have velocity. And in the middle of the force velocity curve, you have power, okay? You develop your finishing power by working all parts of the force velocity curve, typically focusing on what you're weakest in. Okay? So if you're someone that's really, really strong, but you're slow as shit, you probably want to spend a little bit more time on the velocity side of the curve. If you're someone that's super fucking fast, but you're weak as shit, you probably want to spend some time on the force side of the curve. If you're pretty strong or you've spent time building strength and you're pretty fast or you've spent time building velocity and speed, then you want to spend time in the middle of the curve where we bridge the gap between force and velocity and you start to train power. Okay? Now, how do you train each of these different qualities? There's some other parts of the curve, strength, speed, strength, but for simplicity's sake, we're just going to talk about force, power, and velocity. Let's start with the force side of the curve. If you're weak, if you have a hard time squatting, if you have a hard time benching, if you have a hard time deadlifting, you feel weak in the gym, you don't have a lot of strength, you need to spend time on the force side of the curve. Typically, you're going to train your force output in the off camp or the pre-camp, okay? Training for max strength or max force output can be pretty fatiguing because it requires a lot of recruitment and a lot of neural drive. Your nervous system goes to work. So it can be pretty fatiguing on your nervous system, not on your body. And doing too much heavy lifting like that in camp could crush some of your recovery and take away from your skill sessions. So when we're in the off camp, when we're in the pre-camp is when I like to really develop high levels of strength with my athletes that need it. My athletes are typically lifting heavy year round. So even if I have a fighter in camp, we're usually doing like heavy doubles or heavy triples, but at a very low volume just to maintain their force output. If you need to build strength though, your volume is going to be a bit higher than it would be when you're in camp, and it's going to be more of a focus on strength. Now, you build force, you build max strength through heavy compound movements, squat variations, deadlift variations, bench press variations, horizontal rows and presses, vertical rows and presses. The actual movement doesn't matter as much. Like, obviously, you're going to be able to load a back squat more than you're going to be able to load a Zerker squat. However, let's say you've got a fucked up neck and you can't axial load, like you have a hard time loading a bar on your back, then loading it anteriorly with a Zerker or a front squat is going to be fine. Like, you're going to be able to build strength. So we want to use multi-joint compound movements. And we want to be heavy. Like, you want your intensity to be high, like 85% of your 1 rep max or more. 0 to 2 reps in reserve. We're keeping the volume generally low. So we're looking at anywhere from like 1 to 5 sets of like 1 to 3 reps. So it's low reps, low volume, but the weight is really high. We don't care about speed, how quickly you move here. You should be trying to move the bar as fast as possible with as much fucking intent as possible. It's just not going to move fast because it's heavy as shit. If the bar is moving super quick, then you need to put more weight on the bar. You're not lifting heavy enough, okay? So that's the force side of the curve. On the other side of the curve, we have velocity, how quickly you can go from point A to point B. If you're pretty strong, but you're really slow, then you want to train velocity. Also, with our clients, we're typically training velocity more heavily when we're in camp. I always have some kind of high velocity, dynamic effort movement throughout every single training phase for our clients. Our clients are always doing plyometrics. They're always doing Olympic variations, but they have a higher volume of velocity and dynamic effort work when they're in camp because it's not very fatiguing. It's not going to take away from their skills training and the tactics for their fight. And we're maxing out their power. The power adaptations, let's say you train power consistently for 2 months and then you go back into like a strength block or you go into a muscular endurance block, you will detrain power very, very quickly within a month. Where if like you spend 3 months building strength and then you go solely focusing on power, your strength is going to carry over for a couple months. And so the detraining of power is much faster than the detraining of other athletic qualities, the detraining of velocity, rate of force development, which is why we increase the volume of those things when we're in camp. Now, velocity, how quickly you can go from point A to point B. we're not really worried about weight or load to this much. Intensity is really dependent on your output. You have to go fucking 100%. You have to move as fast as you can with as much intent as you can. We're talking top speed sprinting. We're talking high level plyometrics, things like bounds, things like depth jumps, things like fucking triple jumps, putting everything that you have into those movements. You can use some lighter ballistics, but typically, like when we're building velocity with our clients, we're fucking just focusing on jumping and sprinting. We might use some compound movements with accommodated resistance, so like banded bench press, squats with chains, to add a little bit of an acceleration component, because like when you squat with something like a chain, it gets heavier as you increase, as you come out of the hole, and so that requires you to have acceleration throughout the entire movement. You have to get faster, whereas like if you don't have an accommodating resistance, you don't have bands or chains, then most likely you're going to get slower as you come out of the hole. And so volume for this, again, we're keeping it moderate to low. We're looking at anywhere, I would say, like 1 to 10 sets. And again, the volume, the reps on these are super low, 1 to 3 reps. Again, we want full intent, max power. We talked about it. Any kind of movement that comes from your alactic system is going to burn out very quickly. You only have about 10 seconds. So we're only getting about 10 seconds of work here. Like if we're doing sprint intervals, you're going to sprint for 10 seconds and then you're going to rest for 2 minutes. You're going to rest for 3 minutes. You're going to allow your body to regenerate its ATP so you can put full effort into every single rep that you do. So that's the velocity side of the curve. To bridge the gap and focus on training power directly, once you've built strength, once you've built velocity, then we can really start focusing on power. Again, I train power with my clients year round, phase round. Just depending on the phase that we're in determines how much direct power work we're going to do. Just like velocity, if I'm in camp or we're getting closer to a fight, we're going to have a higher volume and a higher focus on power work. If we're out of camp, we're focusing on other athletic qualities, strength, aerobic capacity, cardiac power. Maybe we're adding some muscle. Maybe we're changing weight classes. Maybe we're addressing injuries. And so there's still going to be some direct power work. It's just going to be a little bit lower. The way that we train power, now we're keeping weights in the equation now. We're going to lift with weights. However, unlike max strength work, force work, we are now concerned with the rate of force development. Now I want to move a moderate to a light amount of weight, anywhere from like 30 to 60% of your 1 rep max, as fast as fucking possible. That shit has to move. Like when I was in college, I interned with my school. I went to Temple University. It's a Division I college. I interned in the Olympic sports department. And this is where I learned a lot about using the conjugate method with athletes. And we did a lot of band-resisted squats with athletes. And when I was with the football team for a little while, D1 football team, bro, these athletes were doing like 10 sets of 2 reps, and they would come out the hole, and at the top of the squat, it would sound like they were dropping the bar on the ground. That's how much noise it made, because that's how fast they were fucking moving with the bar on their back. So your intent here is everything. More important than the reps, more important than the sets, more important than the weight or the bands that you use is your fucking intent. You have to put 100% of yourself into everything that you have. Exercises that I love for training power directly. Nothing beats Olympic variations. Your cleans, your clean pulls, your high pulls, your snatches, your jerks, things that get your ankles, knees, and hips to triple extend. Just like when you throw a punch, those 3 things triple extend. That's what generates power. Your power is coming from your hamstrings and your glutes. You gotta fucking triple extend. Olympic variations are the best way to do this. I also love accommodated resistance movements like banded squats, banded deadlifts, banded bench presses. Chains can be great. We can use them for both velocity training and direct power training. Direct power training, You can also use just regular, like a lot of my clients will do barbell jump squats. We'll do dumbbell jump squats. If they have a lower training age in the weight room, or they're just not as technically proficient in some of these other movements, we can still generate a lot of power. A clean jump shrug is a great example, or a trap bar clean pull is a great example, because it's easy. You just have an athlete get in a trap bar, squat down, hinge down, grab the bar, and then just fucking jump, and you're going to be able to develop power. Ballistic exercises here are also great. Med ball slams, med ball throws, ballistic bench presses with a Smith machine. Something that gets you to throw an external object and move it through air really, really fast is going to allow you to produce a lot of force very quickly, and you're going to improve your rate of force development. Okay? And so that pretty much sums up my overview on finishing power, okay? Very important. You can train finishing power. You got to be strong, you got to be fast, and then you got to be able to produce that force as fast as possible. You have to understand how your ATP PCR system works. ATP phosphocreatine. It's an anaerobic, so there's no oxygen, alactic system, so no lactate is being produced. It's your most violent, aggressive system. Lasts up to 10 seconds. It fades very quickly, but bro, that shit is powerful. Be strong, be fast, be powerful. One more thing that you can do to help with your power output is to supplement with creatine. Creatine is the number one supplement. Every fucking person on the planet, not even athletes, should be taking it. Not only is it unbelievable for your athletic performance, but it's very good for your brain as well. And as combat athletes, we need all the help that we can get, quite honestly. The way creatine works and why it's so beneficial is because when you supplement with creatine, your muscle gets saturated with creatine. And so typically when you use your ATP system, ATP PCR system, it burns out fairly quickly. Well, when you're saturated with creatine, it takes just a little bit longer for it to burn out. That creatine's more readily available, and then it's going to regenerate a little bit faster. Session to session, you're not going to see massive gains. If you could typically squat 3 sets of 3 with 315 on the bar, maybe you're going to squeeze out a set of 4 or a set of 5. You might be able to do a couple extra reps in a movement per session. Session to session, it's not that big of a deal, but an extra rep each session, each month, each year, that's a lot of extra reps, and that can create a lot of extra gains. So you would be silly not to be supplementing with creatine. But that's it. That's all I got for you. A quick power guide. Start training power right away. If you want help developing power, because I know it's a lot, and look, this shit is confusing. There's a lot of information out there, and especially if you want to succeed as a fighter, you don't have a lot of time to make it in this sport. Your window is small. I went to school for 4 years to learn this shit. I've been training MMA since I was fucking 5 years old, and I'm still learning shit every single day. This is my lifetime, and it took me a long time to master these things. I'm telling you, if you want to make it as a fighter, you don't have the time to learn all by yourself, and you probably don't have the enjoyment or desire to do it. You just want to fucking train. You got enough shit to worry about. So if you're serious and you want help and you need to develop finishing power, because you do, if you want to make it, you got to develop finishing power. I'd love to see how we can help you. Reach out to me on Instagram. DM me the word collective. I'll reach out. I'll say I can help. We'll put you on a plan. We'll get you finishing fights. I got 5 guys on my team this year that are looking to make Contender Series runs, so we know what the fuck we're talking about. If you want help, hit me up. I'll see you on Sunday where we break down Thailand. It's going to be Alexandra's first appearance on the Fight Science Made Simple podcast. I'm fucking hype. I hope you're fucking hype. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.